we have to talk about the brain, about the functional unit that is the neuron. Here, we have the neuron from an anatomical point of view, with the cell body of the neuron, the neuronal nucleus, the axon, the Schwann cells with the node of Ranvier, and also those small terminal synaptic endings that will communicate with other types of neurons. Well, we can say that the neuron is the functional unit of the central nervous system, an excitable cell that transmits and propagates electrical signals. And this property is due to the presence in the plasma membrane of specific proteins that allow certain ions to pass through the ion channels. It is also a secretory cell that manufactures neuropeptides and neurotransmitters through a system called exocytosis. So the emission and propagation of a message or nerve impulse depend on these characteristics that the neuron has. But in the neuron, we can also find a presynaptic element where we manufacture the neuromediators through that exocytosis mechanism. Here you see a postsynaptic element that has a series of receptors, a series of channels through which those neuropeptides or neuromediators produced in the presynaptic terminal interact. When we talk about neurotransmitters, we can classify them as derivatives of amino acids, such as catecholamines, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, or indolamines, such as serotonin and melatonin, or also from amino acids such as aspartate and glutamate, which are excitatory amino acids or neurotransmitters, and also inhibitors like gamma-aminobutyric acid, which we also know by the name of natural value. Also glycine, remember acetylcholine, which is the neuromediator of the parasympathetic nervous system. Remember that the sympathetic system in excess destroys us, while the parasympathetic repairs us. So to produce this type of catecholamines, when we want to produce dopamine, we do it from L-tyrosine, which in the presence of vitamin B and iron transforms into dopa, and through a series of other factors transforms into dopamine, which then converts to norepinephrine and epinephrine, and from monoamine oxidases they can be transformed into vanillyl mandelic acid, which we can study and find directly in urine. Situations of dopamine deficiency occur, especially when through nutrition that amino acid L-phenylalanine or L-tyrosine does not enter, particularly in vegans or vegetarians, or simply in people who follow very restrictive diets, which can lead to a deficiency of these types of amino acids, or also a deficiency in absorption because the intestine is inflamed. We see that in Parkinson's disease, there may be a deficiency of tyrosine hydroxylase, which is the enzyme that converts tyrosine into L-dopa. So if there is a problem with tyrosine hydroxylase, due to a deficiency of this enzyme, it can also lead to Parkinson's problems. Deficiency of cofactors, iron deficiency anemia. We know that iron is one of the most important micronutritional deficiencies worldwide. The growing child, the pregnant woman, people who do not have adequate nutrition, do not provide iron to the body, and if there is no iron, that L-tyrosine does not convert into dopamine. The use of oral contraceptives produces a deficiency of vitamin B. Stress, we know that in stressful situations, we excrete and eliminate up to 4 times more magnesium than usual through urine. We can also have a deficit in the production of dopamine, especially in people who are very addicted to tobacco or in people who have physical inactivity. We are going to enter the pathway of indolamines, where the precursor amino acid of serotonin is tryptophan, which in the presence of cofactors also converts into 5-hydroxytryptophan, subsequently turning into serotonin, and later, through a series of biochemical processes of acetylation and methylation, it is biotransformed into melatonin in the pineal gland. But you see that helper cofactors are also needed in the synthesis, formation, and production of serotonin, and subsequently melatonin. What serotonergic effects can we find? Well, we know that serotonin can be present in platelets, in the digestive system, in the brain, and in the retina. Notice that there is an effect encoded by a different gene, effects on smooth muscle, increased intestinal motility, contractions of the uterus. Also an increase in contraction at the level of the bronchiole, and central effects such as the regulation of sleep, mood, thermogenesis, and ultimately appetite. Factors that can limit the bioavailability of tryptophan. This is very important because sometimes we give tryptophan and it is not assimilated properly. It is important to remember that the tryptophan, that is part of the proteins we consume daily, only represents 1% of the total amino acids. It should be noted that tryptophan is destroyed by intense heat or prolonged cooking or a prolonged heat source. So if we consume barbecued proteins that have been processed with excessive heat, it is possible that tryptophan is destroyed by this heat, and then you no longer benefit from the tryptophan that comes from food. Also, in the case of constipation, remember that tryptophan can be transformed into indole through the gut flora. Certain substances released as a result of the putrefaction process in the intestine, such as indole, skatole, mercaptan, and indican, can promote its development due to constipation issues. It also competes with tyrosine. For this reason, if we want to increase dopamine, we will give L-tyrosine or L-phenylalanine in the morning to avoid interaction in that competition with tryptophan. L-tryptophan or 5-HTP, which is 5-hydroxytryptophan, should be given about 10 minutes before lunch and dinner, but not together because they can compete through the intestinal barrier. There are also limiting factors in the bioavailability of tryptophan. For example, the passage through the blood-brain barrier depends on free plasma tryptophan, that is, tryptophan that is not bound to albumin. It has been observed that when branched-chain amino acids such as isoleucine, leucine, and valine are consumed, they compete with the transporters. So sometimes there are problems of anxiety, nervousness. These people seem to be overstimulated, and sometimes it is due to an excess of serotonin. Here, it would be very beneficial as a therapeutic strategy to provide branched-chain amino acids before meals, which would compete with the entry of tryptophan through the blood-brain barrier.